Tonight, prepare to drift into the deepest sleep of your life, guided by ancient whispers. If you're here to finally find peaceful rest with a truly unique historical journey, you're in the right place. Forget generic sleep sounds. We're about to unlock the profound peace found within Plutarch's Lives, Volume 1. Imagine settling into slumber as the wisdom of legendary figures like Lycurgus of Sparta and Numa Pompilius of Rome gently washes over you. This isn't just a story. It's a meticulously crafted experience designed to calm your mind and soothe your soul. But what secrets did these ancient leaders hold that could possibly guide your modern mind to rest? How did the fierce discipline of a Spartan lawgiver or the tranquil piety of a Roman king create blueprints for peace that transcend millennia? Tonight, we'll journey through their extraordinary lives, comparing their paths to discover the surprising truths that can quiet your inner world. This isn't just an audiobook. It's an invitation to a different kind of relaxation. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin your tranquil journey. If you're ready for deep sleep, please give this video a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss our next historical escape. Life of Lycurgus. With Lycurgus the lawgiver, nearly everything about him lies in dispute: his birth, his travels, his death, and most of all, his legislation. Even the dates assigned to his life do not agree. Some say he lived in the time of Iphidus, and together with him established the Olympic truce. Among these is Aristotle, who points to a discus at Olympia, bearing the name of Lycurgus, as proof. Others, such as Eratosthenes and Apollodorus, by reckoning the reigns of Sparta's kings, argue that he lived many generations earlier than the first Olympiad. The historian Timaeus took another view, that there were two lawgivers of that name, born in different centuries, and their legacies were merged into the legend of one man. The earlier of the two, he believed, lived close to the age of Homer. Indeed, some even claimed that he met Homer in person. Xenophon, for his part, calls him a man of deep antiquity, placing him among the earliest descendants of Heracles. Troubled though these accounts may be, let us follow the most consistent traditions and the best authorities. The poet Simonides once claimed that Lycurgus's father was not Eunomus, but Prytanes. The majority, however, say this, that Su, son of Proclus and grandson of Aristodemus, fathered Euripus. Euripus fathered Prytanes, and Prytanes begot Eunomus. Eunomus had two sons, Polydex by his first wife, and Lycurgus by Dionysa, the second. By this reckoning, Lycurgus was sixth in descent from Proclus, and 11th from Heracles. The most notable of his ancestors was Su, under whom the Spartans subdued the Helots and seized much of Arcadia. One story tells of Su trapped by the Clitorians in a fortress without water. Pressed by thirst, he agreed to surrender disputed territory if he and his men could drink from the nearest spring. When brought there, he declared that any of his soldiers who could refrain from drinking should inherit his crown. No one succeeded. They all drank. Only then did Su himself approach, sprinkle his face with water, and march away without drinking. By that act, he refused to honor the treaty, claiming not all had drunk. This won him fame, yet it was his son Euripon, not Su, who softened the rule of Sparta's kings. From him, the royal house took the name Eurypontidi. But this easing of authority stirred in the people a desire for greater freedom. Disorder spread. Some kings resisted and became hated, others gave in and seemed weak. In these troubled times, Lycurgus's father Eunomus was killed when attempting to part two quarreling men, struck down by a cook's chopper. The crown passed to his elder son Polydex, but after Polydex died childless, it should have fallen to Lycurgus. He did reign, but only until it was discovered that his brother's widow was expecting. At once he declared that, should the child be a boy, the crown would pass to him, and he himself would only serve as guardian. Among the Spartans, such a guardian of a royal orphan was called a prodigus. The queen, however, secretly proposed that they kill the infant, and that she and Lycurgus rule together as king and queen. Though horrified, he concealed his disgust. He told her not to harm her body by abortion, but that he himself would arrange to remove the child. In truth, he only sought to preserve its life. When her time came, he set guards to watch. If it was a girl, the child would remain with the women. If a boy, it must be brought directly to him. As chance had it, he was dining with the city magistrates when the infant was born, a son. The servants carried him in. Lycurgus took the child, laid him on the royal seat, and said, "Spartans, a king is born to you." They named him Charalaus, meaning joy of the people. Lycurgus had ruled as king only 8 months, and when he laid aside the crown, his reputation for justice grew greater still. The people obeyed him out of respect for his virtue rather than his official power. Yet envy rose against him. The Queen Mother's relatives resented him, calling his actions a humiliation to her. Her brother went so far as to accuse him openly, hinting that if anything happened to the child, the blame would fall upon Lycurgus as the usurping uncle. Distressed and wary of suspicion, he resolved to leave Sparta until his nephew came of age and fathered an heir of his own. He sailed first to Crete, where he studied the laws and lived among the foremost statesmen. He admired some Cretan institutions while rejecting others, and persuaded a distinguished man named Thales, known at the time only as a poet, to travel with him to Sparta. Beneath his verse lay a master of political wisdom. Through his songs, Thales softened the rifts among Spartans, encouraging concord and honorable pursuits, preparing the way for reform. From Crete, Lycurgus traveled to Asia Minor, drawn, it is said, to compare the frugal life of the Cretans with the luxury of the Ionians, much as a physician studies both the healthy and the diseased. There he first discovered the poems of Homer, preserved in full by the house of Creophilus. Others had glimpsed fragments here and there, but Lycurgus was the first to collect them, recognizing in Homer not only delight, but also instruction for politics and virtue. Some say he also went to Egypt, where he admired the caste of warriors excluded from labor and trade, and brought back the idea of separating citizens from common workers. A few Greeks confirmed that influence, though tales of his journey to Libya, Iberia, or even India, where he was said to have spoken with the naked philosophers, the gymnosophists, are mentioned only by aristocrats of Sparta. While he was away, the Spartans came to regret his absence. They sent embassies pleading for his return, saying their kings bore only the name of royalty, while Lycurgus alone had the spirit and power to rule. Even the kings themselves desired him back, hoping he might strengthen their authority and restrain the insolence of the crowd. On his return, Lycurgus resolved not to reform Sparta by halves. Like a physician treating a deep disease, he would burn or cut away the source of corruption and make the city begin anew. To confirm his purpose, he went to Delphi. The oracle greeted him as beloved of the gods, as almost divine, and promised that the laws he would establish would become the best constitution the world had seen. Thus emboldened, he gathered the noblest men, speaking first in private, then banding together more and more allies. When the moment was ripe, he ordered 30 of them to appear in the marketplace at dawn, fully armed, to overawe resistance. Chief among them was Arthmiades, his truest partner in the work. At first young King Charalaus, alarmed by the sight, fled to Athena's temple in fear of revolt. But reassured by solemn promises, he returned to join their cause. He was a gentle ruler, almost too gentle. His fellow king, Archelaus, once remarked with sharpness, "How can Charalaus be a good man when he cannot bring himself to be harsh, even toward the wicked? Of the many reforms of Lycurgus, the first and most important was the creation of the Council of Elders. Plato writes that this council cooled what he called the fever of royalty. With its equal vote alongside the kings, it brought caution and balance to their decisions. The Spartan state, once swinging recklessly between monarchy and mob rule, now found firm balance. The elders supported the kings against the people when democracy grew unruly, yet sided with the people against the kings when power threatened to turn despotic. Aristotle says the council originally had 28 members. Because of the 30 companions of Lycurgus, 2 lost courage and withdrew. Others maintain it was 28 by design. Some claim the number had mystical significance. 7 multiplied by 4, the first perfect number after 6, equal to the sum of its parts. Yet the most practical reason was this: together with the 2 kings, the council made a ruling body of 30 in all. So devoted was Lycurgus to this institution that he even brought back an oracle from Delphi in its support, called the Rhetra. It said, "When you have built a temple to Zeus and Athena of Greece, and divided the people into tribes and obes, you shall found a council of 30, including the kings. And from season to season you shall summon the people in assembly, and lay measures before them for their decision." The tribes and obes were divisions of the people. The term Apolasian, to summon, linked the whole constitution to Apollo. The assemblies were held not in grand buildings, but in the open air, between a river called Nakian and a bridge called Babyca. Lycurgus thought that fancy architecture distracted the mind, filling it with spectacle instead of sobriety. The people gathered there in the open were not to introduce or debate proposals, but only to approve or reject measures laid before them by kings and elders. In later years, however, the people began altering those motions, twisting their meaning or inserting additions. Kings Polydorus and Theopompus then added a new rule: if the people should make a crooked decision, the chiefs and elders shall set it right. This change, they claimed, was also ordained by Apollo, and the city believed it. Tertius, the poet, praised this settlement in verse, saying that in Sparta the kings should govern first, then the elders, and the people last of all. Though Lycurgus designed this balance, later generations placed another check upon it: the office of the ephors. The ephors appeared some 130 years later, under King Theopompus. When his wife reproached him for passing to his children a crown weaker than the one he had inherited, he replied, "No, more valuable, for it will last longer." Stripped of absolute power, the Spartan king was safe. Kings in nearby Argos and Mycenae, who clung to despotism, were soon overthrown. Sparta endured, and the wisdom of Lycurgus proved itself against the revolutions that destroyed her neighbors. The second and boldest reform was the redistribution of land. In Sparta, wealth had collected into very few hands, while many citizens fell into poverty. Lycurgus persuaded the landowners to yield up their estates. In their place he established an equal division of land, removing once and for all the envy, arrogance, and misery bred by extremes of wealth and want. Henceforth, Spartans strove to surpass one another not by riches, but only by courage and virtue. The countryside was divided into 30,000 equal lots for the perioikoi, and 9,000 lots for the full Spartan citizens. Each allotment was measured so that a man's share would produce 70 bushels of barley, his wife's share 12 more, and oil and wine in like proportion, enough for health, but not for luxury. Years later, when harvest made the field stand in neat equal rows, Lycurgus smiled and said, "All Laconia has the look of brothers sharing the land." To erase inequality further, he next attacked wealth itself. He abolished gold and silver coinage, replacing it with iron money, heavy, bulky, and of little value. 10 minas required a room to store and oxen to carry. Quenched in vinegar, the iron was brittle and useless for craftwork. With such money, theft and bribery disappeared. What thief would trouble to steal what could not be hidden or spent? Nor would foreign merchants sell their wares for it. So luxury and costly imports vanished from Sparta. Sophists, fortune-tellers, and goldsmiths, professions thriving elsewhere, found no market there. Tools, furniture, and necessities alone were valued, and Spartan artisans gave their finest skill to useful things. The field cup of the Spartans, invented in this age, was prized for soldiers, shaped to make foul water look clean, and designed so dirt settled at the bottom, while the drink above seemed pure. Yet the greatest of Lycurgus's reforms was the common dining table. No Spartan was to live soft and idle in private homes, pampered with feasts and luxuries. Instead, men were to share simple meals together, with a fixed allowance of food. Rich and poor ate side by side, and differences of wealth could find no expression at the communal board. A man who dined in private and came later was ridiculed as weak and self-indulgent. The wealthy resisted this reform most bitterly. In one uproar, they hurled stones at him in the market, and he fled for refuge. All but one pursuer dropped back. A fiery youth named Alcander caught him, struck him with a staff, and put out his eye. Lycurgus, bloody and blinded, did not curse or retaliate. Standing firm, he showed his wound to the people. Shame and remorse silenced them. They delivered Alcander into his hands, to punish as he pleased. But Lycurgus sought no revenge. He took the youth into his household and dismissed his servants, making Alcander attend to him daily. Living close to him, the impulsive boy saw with his own eyes the lawgiver's steady temper, his simplicity, his tireless devotion to the state. He was transformed by that example, from a reckless and insolent youth to a moderate and disciplined man. After his injury, Lycurgus built a temple to Athena, whom he named Optilitis, for in the Dorian tongue, optilo means eyes. Some writers, including Dioscorides in his account of the Spartan constitution, claim he was merely struck in the eye and not blinded, and that the temple was a thanksgiving offering for his recovery. In any case, from this incident the Spartans gave up the habit of carrying staffs during council meetings. The institution of common meals, known among the Cretans as Andreia, the men's repast, was in Laconia called Phoenicia. The name was said to derive either from philia or friendship, since comradeship ruled their tables, or from Phyto, frugality, since the meals bred moderation. Some believed the word once meant simply food. The men ate in dining groups, usually of 15. Each member contributed a monthly share, a medimnus of barley, 8 measures of wine, 5 minas of cheese, half that of figs, and a small sum to purchase fish or other relishes. Nothing more was permitted, except that when a man brought back a portion from a sacrifice or successful hunt, he could add it to the common table. If absent, he had to explain his tardiness, and only sacrifices or hunting were accepted excuses. This practice endured for centuries. Once, after victory over the Athenians, King Agis wished to dine at home with his wife and sent for his share of the public meal. The officers refused, and when in anger he failed to offer sacrifice the next day, they fined him. Boys, too, were brought to the dining messes. The tables served as schools of discipline, where they learned politics, manners, moderation, and wit. Spartan humor was sharp but never base. One was expected to bear a jest with grace, but if a man asked, the matter went no further. As each entered, the eldest pointed to the door, reminding them, no tale passes beyond this threshold. Candidates for admission to a mess were elected in a peculiar fashion. Each voter cast a pellet of bread into a bowl carried on a servant's head. Those in favor cast it whole, Those opposed crushed it flat. If a single flattened piece was found, the man was rejected, for harmony was deemed essential. The bull use took the name catechus, and rejection came to be called so as well. The fare was simple, yet one dish became famous above all, the black broth. Old men prized it over meat, which they passed to the young. Tradition tells that a king of Pontus once ordered a Spartan cook to prepare this broth. Finding it unpleasant, he reproached the cook, who answered, "O king, to eat this broth with pleasure, one must first have bathed in the Eurotas." For those raised to it, it was the taste of Sparta itself. After their meal and modest wine, the men departed without torches, for it was forbidden to walk with a light. The lawgiver intended they grow accustomed to moving fearlessly through darkness, as in battle. Lycurgus gave no written laws. One of his retras, or divine ordinances, strictly forbade it. He believed that the most vital principles of his constitution must be fixed not on tablets, but in the habits of the people. Citizens, trained from youth, would follow them by choice, not compulsion. What was small or temporary could be adapted by future generations, provided they were educated in the Spartan spirit. In truth, habit was their law, and through it each Spartan became in himself a living lawgiver. The retras touched many matters. One forbade elaborate expenditure. The roofs of houses must use beams cut only with an axe, the doors shaped with a saw, and no finer tool. In homes so plain, luxury found no place. A man could not, set silver-footed couches or golden bowls in a peasant's hut. Thus the house kept men's pride level. It was said that the elder Lycurgus, dining in Corinth beneath a paneled ceiling, asked slyly whether the trees there grew square. Another retro warned against waging too frequent wars against the same foes. Less practice make them dangerous. This lapse was later blamed on King Agesilaus, who by repeated invasions of Boeotia made the Thebans a match for Sparta. Above all else, education was to Lycurgus the noblest duty of a lawgiver. He shaped it from the very start, regulating marriages and even childbirth. Aristotle once claimed he tried to rule the women and failed, but this is untrue. The liberty of Spartan women came from necessity. Their husbands were always away at war, leaving them as stewards of the household. Yet Lycurgus did legislate for them. He decreed that young girls exercise in running, wrestling, and throwing the discus and javelin, that they might grow strong, bear healthy children, and endure pregnancy with vigor. He abolished their cloistering, sending them to join public processions, to dance and sing before the young men. Their playful songs mocked faults and honored virtues. Those praised by the maidens found themselves admired, while those ridiculed felt the sting of public reproach. Nakedness in their festivals carried no shame, only modesty and honesty, encouraging simplicity and pride and strength. Thus Spartan women became renowned for their candor and spirit. When a foreign lady remarked to Queen Gorgo, wife of Leonidas, that Laconian women alone ruled their men, she replied, "Yes, for we alone bring forth men." Sparta's marriage customs carried the same discipline. Husbands carried off brides as if by force. These were not children, but grown women fit for marriage. Afterward, the bridesmaid shaved the woman's hair, dressed her in a man's cloak and sandals, and laid her on a bed in the dark. The groom, without pomp or banquet, came quietly to her only after dining at his public table, and then left again to join his companions for the night. This went on until husband and wife had children, sometimes before they had ever truly seen one another by daylight. Shame and secrecy kept desire sharpened and discipline unbroken. Jealousy was subdued in the same spirit. Adultery in the lawless sense was forbidden, yet older husbands with young wives might share them with youths of fine birth, and raise the children as their own. A man who clung jealously to exclusive rights over his wife was ridiculed as foolish and small. The aim was not disorder, but vigor in the race, and freedom from selfish passions. It was even permitted in Sparta for a virtuous man, if he admired the noble qualities of a married woman, to ask her husband's consent to beget children with her, on the principle that fine seed in good soil should not be wasted. For Lycurgus did not regard children as belonging chiefly to their parents, but to the state itself. He wished Spartans to be born of the strongest and best stock, and he mocked the inconsistency of other peoples, that they paid dearly for the breeding of fine horses and dogs, yet shut up their wives in jealous seclusion, content to have children by themselves alone, even if diseased, weak, or foolish. So while men might lend their wives for worthy offspring, adultery was considered impossible in spirit. The Spartans simply did not accept it as a crime that could exist among them. Gerades, an aged Spartan, was once asked by a stranger what punishment they gave to adulterers. He answered, "There are no adulterers in Sparta. But if one were found, pressed by the stranger, then he would be fined a bull so large he could stand atop Mount Taygetus and drink from the river Eurotas below." The stranger laughed. "Where could anyone find such a bull?" "Where," replied Gerades, "could anyone find an adulterer in Sparta? Even when children were born, they did not belong to the whim of the father. Each newborn was carried to a place called the Lesh, where the elders of the tribe examined it. If well-formed and healthy, the baby was approved and a plot of land in the citizen's allotment assigned to him. But if deformed or weak, it was left in a wild glen of Mount Taygetus, called the Exposure. For they believed that a life begun without strength would bring only harm to itself and the state. Spartan women, too, were famously rigorous. They washed newborns not in water, but in wine, to test their constitution. The sickly would convulse or shrink. The healthy were steeled and strengthened. Nurses raised these infants without swaddling, freeing their limbs. From the start they were to be hardy, unfussy about food, unafraid in darkness, fearless when left alone. Foreigners prized Spartan nurses, and even Alcibiades of Athens once had one. But unlike Athens, Sparta allowed no child to grow as his father wished. From the age of 7, boys were claimed by the state. At that age, Lycurgus enrolled them in companies, where they ate and lived together. Overseen by a superintendent chosen for bravery and noble birth, they elected as their boy leader the smartest and fiercest in play or fight. They learned to obey absolutely, and even their games became tests of strength, endurance, and courage. Reading and writing were taught only as much as necessary. The whole of their education aimed at one goal: to cheerfully endure toil and hardship and to win wars. As they grew older, the discipline grew harsher. Their heads were shorn. They went barefoot, and from their 12th year wore only one garment through summer and winter. Luxuries were almost unknown. Baths and oil were denied except on festival days. At night they slept together in their companies, on beds of reeds they gathered from the banks of the Eurotas, plucked with their bare hands. In winter they mixed in the herb lycophon for warmth. Their education never ceased. Elders constantly hovered over them, watching even their play, listening to their sharp conversations, and correcting faults like stern but watchful fathers. Boys were grouped under leaders known as Irones, young men in their 20th year. Each Iron commanded his troop in play fights and exercises, and in daily life ordered them to fetch wood, gather herbs, or serve him at meals. The boys also had to steal food. Some raided gardens, others the public dining tables. If they were caught, they were scourged mercilessly, not for stealing, but for being clumsy. The scarcity of food was meant to sharpen their wit, toughen their bodies, and teach resourcefulness. One tale tells of a boy who had hidden a live fox under his cloak to smuggle it away. While in hiding, the creature tore at his belly with teeth and claws. Yet the boy never revealed it, and let himself be ripped open rather than confess. Many Spartans, even in later ages, it is said, suffered scourging at the altar of Artemis Orthia until death, with pride, not despair. After their austere dinners, the iron would stretch out and command one boy to sing, another to answer a question. Who is the bravest man among us? Or, why is such a law good? In this way, they were taught from childhood to think about virtue and politics. Boys who could not answer wisely and briefly were considered dull of spirit. Brevity was prized, wit sharpened. Those who rambled were punished by a bite upon the thumb. The iron had full authority to strike or punish, but afterward elders judged whether he had acted justly, whether too harsh or too weak. Even in matters of love, discipline, and honor ruled. Older men formed bonds of admiration with promising boys. The boy's honor was the lover's honor. If the boy behaved cowardly in battle or uttered a shameful word, the man who cared for him was fined. Yet this love was never meant to be corrupt. It was to inspire, to urge one another onward. Above all, Lycurgus cultivated a speech as lean as their lives, sharp, compressed, and memorable. Just as heavy, oversized iron coins had little value, yet filled much space, so Laconian words were small but full of weight. The Spartan tongue became famous for its brevity. To an Athenian who mocked their tiny swords as fit for stage jugglers to swallow, King Agus replied, "And yet with these little daggers we reach our enemies." So too with Lycurgus himself. His sayings were short, but keen. Asked why he forbade rich and costly sacrifices, he answered, "So that we may never cease to sacrifice." To one who urged democracy, he replied, "Begin first by making a democracy in your own household." His laws of action and of speech were alike, simple, austere, and unyielding. In his letters, Lycurgus gave answers of the same concise kind as in speech. When the people asked how best to keep their enemies at bay, he replied, "By remaining poor, and by not each man striving to be greater than the other." Asked about the strength of city walls, he said, "That town is not unwalled which has courage for its defense, instead of brick and stone." Whether these letters are truly his is uncertain, but his style of brevity is consistent. The Spartans detested long and idle words. Once, when someone delivered a useful discourse at an unfit time, King Leonidas remarked, "Stranger, you speak of what is wanted, when it is not wanted." Charalaus, the cousin of Lycurgus, was asked why Sparta had so few laws. He answered, "Because men who say little require few laws." In the same spirit, King Archidamidas defended the silence of a sophist at dinner. He who knows how to speak knows when to speak also. Their wit was often sharp. Demaratus, pestered by a fool asking repeatedly, "Who is the best man in Sparta?" replied, "He who is least like you." When some praised the justice of the Hellenes, who ruled the Olympic Games, King Agus answered, "What is so great about men being just only once in 5 years?" Another stranger boasted he was known at home as a lover of Sparta. Theopompus said dryly, "It would bring you more honor to be called a lover of your own city." Pleistoanax, son of Pausanias, told an Athenian orator who mocked Spartan ignorance, "It is true, we are the only Greeks who have not learned mischief from you." And when Archidamidas was asked how many Spartans there were, he said simply, "Enough to keep out bad men." Their jokes were like their lives, short, cutting, and purposeful. A man who was invited to hear another imitate the nightingale replied, "I have heard the original." When shown an epigram praising men who died to quench a tyrant's pride, a Spartan sneered, "They deserve to die, for they should have let it burn itself out." When offered fighting cocks said to battle until death, a young Spartan answered, "No, give me cocks that will kill their enemies." In such sayings, One sees why philosophy was thought more Spartan than gymnastics. Their poetry and music, too, were carefully guided. Their songs were not idle verses, but calls to arms, praising those who died for their country, condemning cowards, and exalting courage. At festivals, 3 choruses performed. The old men sang, "We once were strong and brave." The young replied, "We are still so, try us." And the children declared, "One day we shall be stronger than you." Such lines revealed Sparta's soul, poetry wedded to valor. Their war songs, sung to the flute, brought this power into battle. Terpander himself praised Laconia as a land where youth is bold with the spear, the muse sings clearly, and justice is revered. Pindar too praised them, where old men are wise, the young brave in fight, where song and dance are honored. Their own poet said it plainly, "The sword with song well combines." It is told that even before battle, their kings sacrificed to the Muses, to remind their men of noble deeds worthy of remembrance. In war, they allowed more freedom than in peace. Young men were permitted fine shields, braided hair, polished armor. For as Lycurgus taught, long hair lends grace to the comely and terror to the ugly. Gymnastic labors grew light. So for Spartans alone, war was easier than preparation for war. Before battling, the king sacrificed a kid, crowned the army with garlands, and ordered the flutes to play the hymn of Castor. Garlanded, they sang their paean and advanced in time to the pipes. It was a sight both terrible and magnificent, warriors moving in perfect order, without shout or tumult, but with cheerful calm. Neither reckless nor timid, they marched straight into the enemy, believing heaven itself was with them. It was their custom that a Spartan with an Olympic crown marched at the king's side. One such athlete, when bribed at Olympia to lose, refused. With great struggle he threw his foe, and when asked, "What have you gained by your victory?" the man smiled and answered, "The honor of standing in front of my king in war." Such honors meant far more to Spartans than gold. When they conquered, they pursued only so far as to secure the victory. They did not cut down the fleeing or slaughter the defenseless. This sparing of the beaten was both noble and useful, for their foes, knowing surrender brought survival, often chose to turn and flee rather than fight to the death. As for Lycurgus himself, some claimed him a warrior who devised even the cavalry order of 50 called the Alamos. Others, like Demetrius of Phalerum, denied that he ever fought, saying he wrought his reforms in peace. The Olympic truce he held was shaped by such a peaceful mind. One legend speaks of him standing in the crowd at Olympia when a mysterious voice urged him to join Iphitus in reforming the games. Believing it divine, he obeyed, helping shape the festival into the enduring grandeur it became. The training of Spartan youth did not end with adolescence. Even into manhood, none lived for himself. They regarded life as a camp, their meals, duties, and leisure all dictated for the good of the state. Work and trade were forbidden. Helots farmed the land, leaving the citizens free for training, hunting, festivals, and conversation. Commerce and lawsuits vanished. With no wealth to quarrel over, suits fell away, and equal discipline reigned over all. Men under 30 did not appear in the marketplace, and the old were ashamed to linger there too often. Instead, leisure was spent in gymnasia, or in the lesgai, the public halls of talk. There, with wit and sharp satire, they praised the noble and mocked the base. Lawsuits were gone, but frank speech corrected all faults. Nor was Sparta all severity. So Sibius says that Lycurgus himself set up an image of the god of laughter, to remind his people that joyous mirth had its place in wine and gathering. They were trained not to live for themselves, but for their city, like bees around a hive. This spirit shone in their sayings. Paeteridas, when not chosen among the 300 picked warriors, went away rejoicing that Sparta had 300 better men than himself. Polycratidas, asked by Persian generals whether his embassy came as private men or ambassadors, answered, "Ambassadors if we succeed, private men if we fail." In every line, the spirit was clear. The Spartan had no private life. He was wholly his country's. When citizens of Amphipolis once came to Sparta, they visited Argiliones, the mother of Brasidas. They asked if she rejoiced in the greatness of her son, and spoke of him as the bravest of men. But she answered firmly, "Speak not so, strangers." Brasidas was noble and gallant, but Sparta was much better than him. Lycurgus himself formed the Spartan Senate, choosing those few who had shared his cause. Thereafter, he ordained that its vacancies be filled by the most worthy men over 60 years of age. This was counted the highest of prizes, yet also the hardest to win, for it did not go to the swiftest runner or strongest wrestler, but to the one judged wisest and best among wise and good men. Its reward was the authority to guard the morals of the state, with power even over life and death. The election of elders was no less unique. Citizens gathered in assembly. In a nearby building, unseen judges listened to the cheering of the crowd as each candidate silently walked through in turn. They wrote down whose applause was loudest, never knowing the man's name, only his order of appearance. The one who had stirred the greatest acclamation was declared chosen. He crowned his head with a garland, offered sacrifice, and was followed home by youths in celebration and women in song. Even so, he made no display, but returned to eat at his usual mess. Only his doubled rations marked the honor, and these he passed on to a woman of his own household, declaring that he gave her as his prize what the city had given him. Equally wise were Lycurgus's laws on funerals. He abolished superstition and fear. The dead could be buried within the city walls in tombs beside the temples, not hidden away, but placed where the young grew accustomed to such sights, feeling neither horror nor pollution. Nothing was buried with the body. They were laid to rest in a purple robe and olive leaves. No name was inscribed, except for warriors fallen in battle or women who had served as priestesses. Mourning was limited to 11 days. On the 12th, sacrifices to Demeter ended grief. For in Sparta, nothing was left without rule. All of life's acts were linked with ceremony, training citizens and city alike in virtue. He was wary, too, of foreign influence. He forbade indiscriminate travel abroad, lest Spartans learn strange and ill-disciplined habits. Strangers who offered no benefit were sent away, not, as Thucydides suggested, because Lycurgus feared they would imitate Sparta, but because he feared corruption of her virtue. To him, a dangerous custom was worse than a plague. Here his legislation seemed free of injustice. Yet one institution, the Cryptia, if indeed it was his creation, would trouble later ages. Aristotle claimed it was his. In it, the boldest youths were sent out armed, by day hidden, by night roaming the roads. They murdered any helots they found, and often targeted the strongest of them as a warning. At other times, those helots once rewarded as brave by crowns of freedom were suddenly made to vanish, in their thousands, none knowing how. Aristotle records also that new ephors, at their yearly oath-taking, declared war on the helots, making it lawful to kill them. They were compelled to debase themselves before the citizens, drunken in public, singing low and shameful songs, and forbidden to touch the nobler music of Terpander or Alcman. Thus it was once said, in Sparta, the free man was the freest of all, and the slave the lowest and most wretched. And yet, I cannot count this savage practice among the works of Lycurgus. His spirit was of moderation and justice, shaped by heaven. The harshness of later years was born of fear during revolts and earthquakes. When at last Lycurgus saw the city ordered by his design and the laws in firm operation, he resolved, like a divine craftsman, to make it eternal. He assembled the citizens and said, "Sparta is now rich in laws for happiness and virtue, but one blessing is yet withheld, which only Apollo can bestow. He would travel to Delphi to seek it. Until his return, they must swear to alter nothing." They swore, kings, elders, and citizens alike. At Delphi, he inquired of the god whether his laws were sufficient. The oracle declared them good, promising Sparta will remain renowned if she keeps the order of Lycurgus. He sent this prophecy home, but unwilling ever to release his people from their oaths, he chose to die there. He ended his life by voluntary starvation, believing a statesman's death should serve the state, not merely close a private life. Thus he secured his city forever, for they had sworn to keep his order until he returned. And never would he return. Not in vain was his vision. For 5 centuries, 14 kings held to his laws, and Sparta was the most celebrated of Greek states. The Ephorate, far from weakening the system, held it stable by a balance between people and kings. Only in the reign of Agis did gold enter Sparta, carried home in triumph by Lysander, who, though incorruptible himself, sowed corruption in his country. With money came luxury, selfishness, and the slow undoing of the old order. Before this, with her staff and her plain cloak, Sparta ruled Greece as Heracles had ruled the world with his lion skin and his club. She deposed tyrants, decided wars, and quelled factions, often without raising an army, but only by dispatching a single commissioner, obeyed at once, like bees assembling at the sight of their queen. Such was Sparta, trained in obedience, perfected in discipline, simple in life, and great in spirit. And thus it was rightly said, Sparta's safety lay not in her kings learning how to rule, but in her citizens learning how to obey. The Spartans never tolerated an unfit commander. Their obedience itself was a lesson in leadership, for only a good ruler could draw forth such willing followers. As a horsebreaker trains a beast to be tractable, so a Spartan leader's task was to instill discipline and obedience in men. And so, other cities desired not Spartan wealth or armies, but Spartan leaders. They sent embassies to Lacedaemon asking for a single man. With him they found strength, as the Sicilians with Gylippus, the people of Chalcidice with Brasidas, and Greeks in Asia Minor who followed Lysander, Callicratidas, and Agesilaus. These men were named regulators and peacekeepers, and their city itself was seen as a living school of order and a model of government. Even in jest this reputation was acknowledged. Stratonicus quipped that Athens ought to manage mysteries, Elis the Olympic games, and Sparta be punished if others did not govern rightly. Yet Antisthenes, the Socratic philosopher, spoke in earnest when he said of the Thebans, rejoicing in their victory at Leuctra, that they were like schoolboys delighted at having beaten their master. For mastery was never Lycurgus's aim. He did not labor so that Sparta might rule others, but that her people might rule themselves. He believed, as Plato and Zeno later wrote, that happiness depends on virtue, self-reliance, and self-control. Yet where philosophers only wrote, Lycurgus built an entire city living the philosopher's life. It was this that gave him renown above every other lawgiver. Aristotle himself observed that though the Spartans held his memory in reverence, worshipping him with a temple and yearly sacrifices as a god, he was yet less honored at home than he deserved. Indeed, when lightning struck his tomb, it was counted as a sign he stood among the special favorites of heaven. Few men of note were so marked, save Euripides long after. As for the place of his death, some say he died at Syra, others in Elis, and still others in Crete. Aristoxenus claimed the Cretans showed his tomb on the road called the Stranger's Way. He is said to have left one son, who died childless, so that his line also perished. His companions, however, and their descendants long held meetings called the Lycurgids. Aristocrates, son of Hipparchus, relates that he himself wished to die abroad, and so ordered his body burned and the ashes cast into the sea. He feared lest, if they were brought home, the Spartans might think themselves freed from their oath and dare to alter his laws. Such is the story of Lycurgus. Life of Numa. On Numa too, opinions greatly differ. Some genealogies trace to him with care, but Clodius, in his book on chronology, declared the truth lost when the Gauls sacked Rome, and that later men forged noble descent for themselves. It is said that Numa was a disciple and friend of Pythagoras. Others deny it, saying either that he needed no Greek philosophy, being born to wisdom, or that he learned from barbarian teachers. Still others insist he lived generations before the Samian Pythagoras was born. They offered another tale, that Pythagoras the Spartan, victor in the Olympic stadium race of the 13th Olympiad, traveled into Italy, met Numa, and guided him in lawgiving. By this route, they explain, Rome's constitution bore likeness to Sparta's. Another tradition declared Numa Sabine by birth, and since the Sabines boasted descent from Lacedaemon, Rome thus carried a Spartan strain. The truth is uncertain, for the reckoning of Olympiads itself rests on Hippias of Elis, whose tablets lacked firm foundation. But let us offer now not the disputes, but the worthy accounts. Romulus had reigned for 37 years. On the 5th of July, what the Romans now call the Noni Capitini, he was offering sacrifice outside the city at the Goat's Marsh. The Senate and people were gathered, when sudden storm clouds enveloped all, with thunder and tempest. The crowd fled. Romulus disappeared. His body was never found. Many whispered that the senators, wearied of his harshness, had slain him. Alarmed by such suspicion, they declared instead that he had been taken up into heaven. Proculus, a man of high rank, swore he had seen Romulus rising in full armor, and heard a voice naming him Quirinus, a god. After this, strife arose over the next king. Rome itself was still divided. The old colonists of Romulus resented the claim of the Sabines, lately admitted as fellow citizens. The Sabines, for their part, insisted on their turn, since they had yielded before to Romulus's rule alone. Both claimed justice. Meanwhile, fearing anarchy if the throne stood empty, the Senate devised the interregnum. Each senator in turn assumed the royal insignia, sacrificed by day, judged by night, and surrendered them after a set time. By this, power was shared and jealousy avoided. Yet suspicion grew. Men muttered that the patricians aimed to make an oligarchy, cheating the people of a king. To still discord, they called a compromise. One person must choose the king, but from the other's race. That way, he would be trusted by both, favored for his blood and for the choice bestowed. The Sabines yielded the right of choice to Rome. The Romans, fearing worse if ruled by their own, selected by Sabines, chose instead a Sabine themselves. In council they named Numa Pompilius. He was not like those Sabines who had already settled in Rome, but a man widely known for wisdom and virtue. The Sabines, on hearing his name, rejoiced even more than the Romans who had proposed him. Thus, with one mind, both parties sent their envoys to entreat Numa to accept the throne. Numa belonged to the Sabine city of Cures, from which the union of Romans and Sabines later took the proud name Carites. He was the son of a respected citizen named Pomponius, and the youngest of 4 brothers. In marvelous coincidence, he was born on the very day Romulus founded Rome, the 10th day before the calends of May. From youth, his nature was good, further chastened by sorrow and nurtured by study of philosophy. He rose above not only common vices, but even that barbaric worship of brute force, teaching instead that true courage lies in mastering one's own passions. He banished all luxury from his home, gained repute as a faithful friend and sound adviser, and devoted his leisure not to money or pleasure, but to the service of the gods and to reflection on their powers. His virtue and wisdom were so well known that King Tatius, joint ruler with Romulus, gave him his only daughter Tatia in marriage. Yet Numa was not puffed up by this honor. He continued to live quietly in cures, caring for his aged father, while Tatia too preferred a private life to regal pomp. She died in the 13th year of their marriage. It became Numa's habit to withdraw often into the countryside, wandering in sacred groves and lonely places. Such solitude gave rise to legends. Men said he was not estranged from human society through madness, but elevated by communion with higher beings, that he conversed with the divine, and learned wisdom from the nymph Egeria, who loved him. This tale resembled many myths, Attis among the Phrygians, Endymion among the Arcadians. Yet in its heart lay a noble truth, that the gods, caring for virtue above all, might favor just men with a guidance akin to love. Whether metaphor or reality, the story marked him as one whose wisdom sprang from heaven. Some philosophers held another view, that when men like Numa or Lycurgus claimed divine voices as their guides, it was no more than policy. For when instituting great and difficult reforms among stubborn peoples, a cloak of divinity gave safety and authority to their laws. It was in Numa's 40th year that envoys came from Rome offering him the crown. They were Proculus and Valesius, both nearly kings themselves, one favored by the party of Romulus, the other by the followers of Tatius. They made their offer in brief words, supposing he would eagerly accept. But Numa resisted. In the presence of his father and his kinsman Marcius, he spoke, "Every change is perilous. A man who has no want nor discontent runs mad to abandon a life at once secure and peaceful for one uncertain and full of danger. Kingship is no prize, but a burden. Consider Romulus himself, suspected both of plotting against Tatius and, in turn, slain by those who should have upheld him. They call him a child of the gods, saved by miracles in his youth. But I am of mortal birth and known parents. My virtues, if such they be, are ill-suited for rule, love of rest, a mind for inquiry, devotion to the gods, detesting war. Yet war is the very breath of Rome, and her people thirst for conquest. They would scorn me when I counseled reverence for the gods and justice among men. They want not a king of peace, but a general of war." But the Romans pressed him all the more, fearing civil discord unless he consented. In his absence, his father and Marcius urged him likewise, "You may spurn wealth, and dismiss the name of royalty as vain, but see greater than either, the chance to serve heaven. To rule Rome in righteousness is duty, not ambition. You may turn a people weary of wars towards peace, religion, and justice. And if Rome must still have wars, better her fury be guided by your hand than by another's." So entreated, and with omens reported favorable, Numa at last gave way. He sacrificed to the gods and set out for Rome. There he was met with universal joy. Senators and people greeted him with affection. Matrons came out to welcome him. Temples resounded with sacrifices of thanksgiving. All rejoiced, as though they themselves had gained not a king, but a kingdom. When brought into the forum, the interrex, Spurius Vedius, asked the question, and the whole people chose Numa for king. Yet he refused the insignia of sovereignty, wishing first to have his rule confirmed by heaven itself. Led to the Capitol, then called the Tarpeian Hill, he stood with the chief augur. Facing south, his head veiled, he received the augur's hand upon his hair, while prayers were spoken and signs sought throughout the heavens. A great silence filled the forum as the people waited. At last auspicious omens were observed. Only then did Numa accept the royal robes and come down among the citizens. He was received with cheers as the most pious of men, beloved of the gods. His first act as king set the tone. He disbanded Romulus's bodyguard, the 300 sellers, declaring he would not distrust loyal people, nor command a disloyal one. Next he added a third high priest, beside those of Jupiter and Mars, in honor of Romulus. To him he gave the title Flamen Quirinalis, the priesthood of Quirinus. From then on, he set about filling Rome with the service of the gods, and rooting all law and custom in piety, discipline, and peace. After winning the goodwill of the people, Numa turned to his greater task. He sought to transform Rome from a city forged in war to one governed by justice. At that time the Romans were, as Plato says of such nations, a people inflamed and angry. Their very existence owed to reckless daring and ceaseless campaigns. Like timber fastened tighter with every blow, Rome's power only grew from its dangers. Numa understood how difficult it would be to bend such iron into gentler form, to soften a people trained in conquest, and to teach them the arts of peace. He sought aid not through armies, but through the gods. With solemn sacrifices, processions, and choral dances, rituals he designed himself. He awed and drew the Romans toward reverence. Where fear might soften the ferocious, he spoke of omens, of secret voices, of dire portents, bending their zeal into superstition that served harmony. In this use of religion as the foundation of law, he showed himself the true disciple of Pythagoras. Like that philosopher who used marvels and signs to impress the crowd, Numa cloaked his own teaching in the story of divine converse with the nymph Egeria and with the muses. He even named one of the muses Tachita, the silent, honoring Pythagoras's reverence for silence. His legislation against images reflected Pythagorean thought as well. He forbade the Romans any likeness of man or beast in their temples, teaching that God is invisible, to be comprehended only by thought. For the first 170 years, they raised shrines without statues, believing it wrong to fashion the imperfect in the image of the perfect. Their sacrifices, too, were bloodless, simple offerings of meal, wine, and olive oil. Stories abound of links between Numa and Pythagoras. Some said the Romans themselves enrolled Pythagoras as a citizen. Numa even named one of his sons Mamercus after Pythagoras's own child, and from that line arose the noble Aemilian family. Yet most of these sayings were easily disputed, and Plutarch himself treated them with little faith. To Numa is also ascribed the creation of the pontifices, the high priests of Rome, with Numa himself reckoned among the first. As for the name, some said it came from potens, the powerful gods whom they served. Others, from the idea of doing all that lay within human power, while acknowledging the limits of mortal hands. A more popular, if simpler, explanation was that the pontifices were bridge builders, guardians of the great wooden bridge sacred to the gods, made entirely of wood, without iron. Any change to it would bring divine wrath. Above them all was the Pontifex Maximus, who not only oversaw public ceremonies, but even guided the sacrifices of individuals. He prescribed the right way to worship and to pray, guarding tradition, and presided also over the holy maidens known as the Vestals. It was Numa who consecrated the first Vestal virgins, entrusting them with the eternal flame. Some explained this as fire's purity and incorruptibility given into unstained souls. Others, as virginity's affinity with fire, both barren yet eternal. In Greece such duties belonged to widows beyond marriage, but in Rome, Numa decreed virgins alone must tend the flame. Should the fire go out, it could not be lit from another hearth. but must be kindled anew with mirrors that gathered the pure rays of the sun into a single burning focus, igniting fresh life as though from heaven itself. At first, only 4 vestals were consecrated: Gigania, Verenia, Canulia, and Tarpeia. Later Servius raised the number to 6, which became the fixed order. Their service lasted 30 years, 10 to learn, 10 to serve, 10 to instruct. At the end, they might marry if they so wished, but few chose it, and fewer still found happiness. So strong was their longing for the life they had left behind. They enjoyed high honor. They could make wills even in their fathers' lifetimes, were given the escort of lictors, and if they encountered a condemned prisoner by chance, his life was spared. When borne in a litter, none might pass beneath it, on pain of death. Yet the laws concerning their fault were as dreadful as their honors were high. A vestal who broke her vow was punished by the most fearful of all deaths. She was walled alive in a vault beneath the Colline gate, with only a bed, lamp, and trifles of food, so that Rome might not bear the guilt of starving one consecrated to the gods. The city sank into silent mourning on those days, as the Pontifex Maximus sealed her away beneath the earth. It was Numa, too, who built the Temple of Vesta to house their eternal fire. Its round form imitated not the earth, but the universe itself, in whose center fire was thought to dwell. The Pythagoreans called this central fire Vesta, around which the earth revolved in humble orbit, not fixed, not central, but subordinate. Even Plato, in his later years, seemed to agree with this doctrine. Thus Numa's temple reflected the deepest philosophies, that fire was the heart of all, divine, eternal, and the source of order. The pontifices also gave instruction in the rites of funerals. Numa had taught that death brought no pollution, and that instead of revulsion, men should honor the gods below, for into their keeping passes the noblest part of all who die. Chief among them was Libitina, goddess of funeral rites, whom some believed to be Proserpine, but learned Romans took for Venus herself, as she presides alike over birth and death, over all entrances and exits of life. Numa also defined the periods of mourning. For infants under 3, none was allowed. For older children, mourning lasted months equal to the years of life they had reached, but never beyond 10. The longest mourning was 10 months, and when that span had passed, widows were free to remarry. If they married before, they must sacrifice a cow with calf. Of his many institutions, 2 shine brightest for their spirit of justice: the priesthoods of the Salii and the Fetials. The Fetials were guardians of peace. They ensured Rome never rushed to arms without first seeking justice. They acted as ambassadors, pleading with states that had done wrong to reconsider. If refused, they called the gods to witness, invoked curses upon themselves should Rome fight unjustly, and only then declared war. Without their sanction, no Roman, even a king, could rightly take up arms. And men remembered later, when the Gauls sacked Rome, that this office had been neglected. The Salii, or leaping priests, originated in the 8th year of Numa's reign, when plague ravaged all Italy. At that time, a brazen shield was said to have fallen from heaven into the king's hands. Numa proclaimed it a gift for the city's salvation, but commanded that 11 more should be fashioned to match it, lest thieves could not be sure which was the divine original. The best craftsman, Veturius Mamurius, made them so perfectly alike that even Numa himself could not tell them apart. These 12 sacred shields, called ancilia, Numa entrusted to the Salii. Each march, they marched the city in scarlet tunics and bronze helmets, carrying the shields, dancing their armed dance with light leaps and whirling steps, striking rhythm with small daggers. Their name, some said, came from salire, to leap. Others tied it to other myths, but their dance and their shields became one of Rome's most ancient rites. To honor Mamurius, the craftsman, his name was woven into the Salii's chant, though some insisted the phrase meant not Veturius Mamurius, but Veterum Memoriam, ancient memory itself. Numa, having arranged all ceremonies, built the Regia near Vesta's temple, a royal house devoted not to luxury, but religion. There he spent his time in sacred duties, instructing priests or waiting, it was said, for converse with divine beings. Another home stood on the hill of Quirinus, where traces were still shown in Plutarch's day. In Numa's processions, heralds went first through the streets, bidding all men cease from work. He judged it irreverent for laborers to catch sacred rites half-heartedly, hammers ringing and shops bustling, while sacrifices were performed. He required silence, attention, and minds wholly given to the gods. A faint echo of this remains in the Roman ritual cry, hoc age, do this thing, to still the crowd before a sacrifice. Many of his customs bore the hidden wisdom of Pythagorean law, forbidding libation with wine from unpruned vines, requiring all sacrifices include flour, directing worshippers to turn as they prayed, and to sit after their prayers. Each, though obscure, bore symbolic meaning, teaching men that rituals were not to be rushed nor mingled with ordinary tasks, but performed with calm, deliberate reverence. So deeply did these practices impress Rome that people believed the wildest legends of his power. Once it was said, he invited citizens to dine and placed before them humble wooden bowls with plain food. Then, as they prepared to eat, he declared his goddess had arrived to visit him. At once the tables were seen covered in golden vessels and costly fare. The strangest tale spoke of his meeting with Jupiter himself. On the Aventine, then outside the city wall, Numa ensnared two rustic deities, Faunus and Picus, by mixing honey and wine in their spring. Captured, they revealed prophecies and taught him charms against thunder. Other versions tell how they conjured down Jupiter, who angrily demanded fearful sacrifices. But each time he named something terrible, human heads, living victims. Numa, guided by Egeria, substituted something harmless, onions for heads, hair for victims, sprats for the living. The god, appeased by this pious wit, relented, and from then on lightning was warded off with a charm of onions, hair, and sprats. The place was called Elicius, from Jupiter's descent. Thus in tales both solemn and wondrous, Rome believed Numa had bound even the powers of heaven to the service of peace. These legends, some fantastic, some solemn, only showed how deeply the Romans had come to regard the gods. Numa, indeed, placed all his hopes upon religion. It is said that when news came to him that enemies were approaching, he only smiled and replied, "And I am sacrificing." The first temples he founded were those of Fides, or faith, and of Terminus. Fides enjoined upon the Romans the greatest of all oaths, still used in their most solemn vows. Terminus, guardian of boundaries, was honored both publicly and privately at the marking of estates. In Numa's time, these sacrifices were bloodless, for he argued that a god of peace and justice must abhor bloodshed. He was also the first to set boundaries to Rome's territory, which Romulus had enlarged only by conquest. Numa divided the land among the needy, removing the cause of violence and turning the citizens' minds to agriculture. He believed farming not only brought prosperity, but instilled a love of peace, as men who labor for their own land fiercely defend it, yet have no wish to despoil their neighbors. He also divided the countryside into districts, called pagi, and appointed for each a head and a guard. Sometimes he inspected them himself, judging men's character by the order of their fields, rewarding the diligent with honors, reproving the negligent to make them better. Another measure much admired was his division of the people, not by race, but by trades. Rome had been split between Romans and Sabines, forever quarreling in their double origin. Numa reflected that hard materials may be fused together only when broken small. So he broke the people into many guilds by occupation: musicians, goldsmiths, builders, dyers, shoemakers, carriers, coppersmiths, and potters. All other trades he combined in one. Each guild had its privileges, festivals, and patron deity. By this device, men forgot whether they were sons of Romulus or of Tatius, and instead were bound by unity of work. It was also Numa who reformed the harsh law that allowed fathers to sell their married sons as slaves. He abolished it, holding it monstrous that a woman, who had married a free man with her father's consent, should find herself wife to a slave. Numa reformed the calendar as well. Under Romulus it had been in disorder, months of 20 or 35 days, and a year of only 360. Numa studied both lunar and solar reckonings, and judged that the sun exceeded the moon by 11 days. He doubled this number and added an intercalary month of 22 days every second year, called Mercedinus. This was but a partial solution, but a step towards order. He further changed the sequence of months, placing March 3rd and making January the 1st. In Romulus's time, March began the year, sacred to Mars. By beginning with January, sacred to Janus, the opener, Numa signaled that government and peace were ranked before war. Some said he himself added January and February, as earlier Romans had reckoned but 10 months. Proof of it remained in the names: Quintilis, the 5th, Sextilis, the 6th, though by order they were the 7th and 8th. Each month also carried meaning. April was sacred to Venus, or, as some said, to the opening of buds, Apiaire, hence its name. May was for Maia, June for Juno, others thinking they meant age majors and youth juniors. The last months bore only their numbers: September, October, November, December. Later ages honored men. Quintilis renamed Julius for Caesar. Sextilis renamed Augustus. But under Numa, their sanctity came from the gods. So too Janus, ancient king or god, who turned men from savage life to civil polity, was set in the first month. His statues bore two faces, for he looked to both past and future. His temple stood in Rome with double gates, opened in war and shut in peace. Rare indeed was the sight of those doors closed. But in Numa's reign they never once were opened, and for 43 years the city knew no war. So great was his power of peace that not only Romans but their neighbors, as though some calm and healthful air spread from Rome, turned to tilling the earth and raising families in quiet prosperity. Festivals flourished, cities blended in fellowship, and all Italy seemed lifted into harmony by the holiness of one man. No war, no revolution, no attempt on the crown stained his reign. Fear of the gods, reverence for the king's virtue, and perhaps heaven's favor itself kept the people innocent, their lives pure of strife. Poets who tried to capture that time spoke of cobwebs on shields, of rust upon swords, of trumpets fallen silent and sleep undisturbed. Plato, ages later, said that men escape misery only when philosophy and power are joined. In Numa, such a combination was seen: a king who ruled more by example than by law, showing his subjects that true sovereignty is to teach justice and love among men. As to his family, historians disagreed. Some say he married only Tadia, and had but one daughter, Pompilia. Others give him 4 sons, whose names later noble houses claim for ancestors: the Pomponii, Pinerii, Calpurnii, and Mamerci, all styled Rex for their royal descent. Some believe these pedigrees were a later invention, but all agreed that Pompilia married Marcius, son of the noble who had urged Numa to take the crown. Their grandson, Ancus Marcius, became Rome's king after Tullus Hostilius. Numa died not by sudden stroke, but by gentle age, a little beyond 80 years. blessed even in death. He was borne to burial by senators, followed by priests, and mourned by all, as though each buried his own dearest friend. His body was laid, not burned, in a stone coffin on the Janiculum Hill, beside it another coffin containing the books he had written, but had forbidden to be made public, lest men follow the letter instead of the spirit. 400 years later, when floods exposed the tombs, the coffin of his body was found empty. The books were read, judged too holy for men to use, and burned. Thus Numa passed from life, king, priest, and sage, who more than any other showed that a city may be ruled by reverence, and that peace, not war, is the true foundation of greatness. All good and just men win their highest praise after death, for their unpopularity dies with them, or even before them. So it was with Numa. His glory grew greater when measured against the unhappy reigns of those who came after. Of the 5 Roman kings who succeeded him, the last was expelled and died in exile. Of the other 4, none passed away naturally. 3 were slain by conspirators, and the 4th, Tullus Hostilius, who mocked Numa's ordinances, deriding piety as laziness and religion as effeminacy, urging instead the restless pursuit of arms, was struck down in sickness, haunted by superstitious terrors, and, according to tradition, perished by a thunderbolt. Comparison of Numa and Lycurgus. Now that we have traced their lives, let us compare them. Much they shared: self-control, reverence for the gods, and power to mold their peoples through law and education. Yet the mark of Numa's greatness lies in his acceptance of the crown, while the mark of Lycurgus lies in his abdication. Numa, though a private man, and not even a Roman, was chosen to rule. Lycurgus, though born king, laid down his crown for righteousness' sake. To gain a crown by virtue is noble. To relinquish one for virtue's sake is nobler still. Their tasks also differed. Numa inherited an excitable city fired with war. He needed only to loosen their tension, bend their spirits from violence to justice. But Lycurgus met a people lax, idle, and disorderly. His task was to tighten and restrain, to tear from them luxuries, gold, silver, soft furniture, banquets, and feasts, and press them into hard labor, training, and arms. Numa could lead his people to ceremonies and processions without resistance, but Lycurgus faced stones and blows, sustaining danger to his life before his reforms prevailed. His path was harsher, but his constitution endured far longer. The two also differed in humanity. If we count the Cryptia and Spartan cruelty to the Helots as part of Lycurgus's design, then Numa was clearly gentler and more civilized. For it was he who began the Saturnalia, allowing slaves to feast with masters, remembering the primeval age of Saturn, when no man was master or slave, but all kinsmen together. Both, however, instilled independence and self-restraint. Yet their highest virtues diverged. Lycurgus valued valor, Numa justice. Numa abhorred injustice, and so refrained from war. Lycurgus trained for war, but Sparta might not be wronged. Numa's reforms favored the people, dividing them into guilds, mingling races, and removing strife. Lycurgus exalted aristocracy, forbidding his citizens commerce or crafts, reserving for them only spear and shield. To the Romans, Numa allowed wealth to grow unchecked. Inequality spread quickly after his time. Lycurgus, by contrast, leveled all to equality of land and fortune, founding his laws upon that evenness. Here Numa failed, for he did not restrain the encroachments of wealth when opportunity lay before him. On marriage, too, their customs reflected their differing tempers. Among Romans, a man might give away his wife through lawful divorce to a childless friend, modestly veiling what was hard to endure. Among Spartans, a husband might even invite another man to beget children with his wife, without dissolving the marriage, showing Spartan indifference where Romans showed uneasy modesty. So with the women of each city. Numa trained Roman maidens to modesty and silence, not even to speak safely in their husband's presence, and matrons lived with reverence and discretion. Spartan girls, under Lycurgus, trained openly, their loose tunics revealing thighs, their voices bold in public, and even over their households. Poets mocked their freedom as shamelessness. Yet his intent was strength for childbearing and maturity for marriage. While Romans gave their daughters in wedlock at 12 years for purity of body and mind, if not for friendship and partnership in life. In education, however, Lycurgus far outshone Numa. For he took all youth into common discipline, drill meals, training exercises, so that Sparta was one mold, one shape of virtue. Numa left education to father's will, to whim and chance, as though Rome were a ship whose crew pulled different ways until the storm forced them into unity. This was the deepest difference between them. Lycurgus made his laws lasting by planting them in the youth, forming minds to love the state. His laws endured 500 years. Numa's peace perished the moment he himself was gone. The temple of Janus, which he had kept closed as if war itself were locked within it, was flung open at once, and Rome rushed again to arms. Which was better? Rome gained greatness by departing from Numa, while Sparta collapsed when she departed from Lycurgus. If one praises wealth, empire, and dominion, Lycurgus seems less to have accomplished. But if one praises innocent lives and justice, then Numa was truly a philosopher king. Most glorious of all is this: Numa was a stranger invited, and ruled a mixed people without army or force, prevailing only by his wisdom and equity. Lycurgus, born to rule and armed with force, had to fight against his own people before he prevailed. Thus each lawgiver, though different in path, aimed at the same end, virtue of their citizens. But where Sparta was hardened into equality and lifelong discipline, Rome was softened into piety and peace. Numa tamed warlike men into order. Lycurgus trained idle men into warriors. Together they stand as the two great mirrors of law and kingship, each revealing that the highest power lies not in conquest or crowns, but in the art of guiding men's souls.